Welcome to the Elephant in the Room with Bradley Devlin. I, of course, am Bradley Devlin. Thank you for making me and the team over at Lone Conservative and the Elephant in the Room podcast part of your quarantine routine. I know we're all, I'm back from Berkeley now in Southern California. We're all in this together, and that's going to be the focus of this episode. Of course, giving you the information that you need about the coronavirus, where it's coming from, what it's doing, how the U.S. is tracking in terms of the economy, as well as the spread of the virus itself. So with that, let's jump right in. Okay, first, I want to quickly get into what we do know and what we don't know about the coronavirus. So here's what we do know. We know that COVID-19 is the latest iteration of coronavirus, which is a family of viruses that includes SARS and MERS. SARS in 2002 and 2003 infected 8,000 people worldwide, killing about 774 and killing 0 Americans, thankfully, according to the WHO. MERS, on the other hand, was the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which was first contracted in Jordan April 2012 and was wrapped up around June of 2013. And this spread through contact primarily with camels and close contact with other human beings. Only about 2,500 people were infected and 858 deaths worldwide, which meant that it had a very, very high mortality rate. Now, COVID-19 is much different than its predecessors. It's more contagious, but it's less deadly. As of yesterday, there were 218,389 COVID-19 cases worldwide, 125,000 of which are still active, and a little over 84,000 of those that are closed and recovered, with almost 9,000 global deaths in 153 countries and regions. Now, the United States has a little over 9,000 cases as of Wednesday, and an additional 2,800 of those were added on Wednesday alone, and deaths now total 150, with cases confirmed in all 50 states. Now, on top of that, President Trump and the White House Coronavirus Task Force has issued new guidelines to help protect Americans during the global coronavirus outbreak, called the 15 Days to Slow the Spread guidelines. The White House says the new recommendations are simple to follow, but will have a resounding impact on public health. While the president leads a nationwide response bringing together government resources and private sector ingenuity, every American can help slow the spread of the virus and keep our most high-risk population safe. Number 1, listen to and follow the directions of your state and local authorities. Number 2, if you feel sick, stay at home. Don't go to work and contact your medical provider. Number 3, if your children are sick, keep them at home and contact your medical provider. Number 4, if someone in your household has tested positive for the coronavirus, keep the entire household at home. Number 5, if you're an older American, stay home and away from other people. Number 6, if you are a person with a serious underlying health condition, such as a significant heart or lung problem, stay home and away from other people. Now, today's guidelines are built on the CDC's general recommendations to help prevent the spread of the coronavirus, and Americans should continue practicing strict personal hygiene, including washing hands regularly for at least 20 seconds at a time and wiping down surfaces in their home often. Even if you are young and otherwise healthy, you are still at risk, and your activities can increase the risk of contracting the coronavirus for others. Everyone can do their part. Yes, stop frickin' spring breaking in Clearwater, Florida, and in Southern California, you frickin' morons. In reality, there's no better way to protect your family and your community than by arming yourself with accurate, up-to-date information. So that's why you should be heading over to the CDC's website, where they have a very accessible COVID-19 page. And I mean, even for my grandmother, it is easy to use. So make sure your grandparents especially are reading and accessing that on top of your family and friends and other loved ones. Now, that's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Now, we don't know the true mortality rate. For younger people, some have projected that it may be under 1%, while elderly folks with already compromised health problems can cause that rate to spike up to 14%. Now, in the US, the more tests we have, the lower the mortality rate seems to be going, hovering around 1.5% as we speak, and will hopefully continue to drop. And obviously, this makes things a lot more difficult, not only in combating the disease and its spread, because so many of the cases are asymptomatic, but it also gives us a false sense of how deadly this disease actually is. In terms of contagiousness, well, it's not always that simple. A Yale New Haven infectious disease specialist says that we simply need more data to find out which body fluids the virus is coming from, how they contaminate surfaces, and how long are they viable for transmission on those surfaces. Furthermore, a study coming out of the Lancet points out that one of the first patients in the United States, a woman in her 60s, only infected one person out of 362 known contacts, and the person she did transmit the disease to was something whom she had frequent and prolonged contact with. We also don't know why coronavirus varies in the level of sickness across age groups and individual patients. Now, I wanted to give you the facts first because information in times like this truly is power. It has the capacity to slow down the crazy reactions we seem to be having throughout society. As a society, from my point of view, we're doing an awful job at towing the line between urgency and panic. When I think of urgency, I think of a focused amount of determination that is shared collectively between individuals in society to make a certain goal come to fruition, and that is defeating this invisible enemy in the coronavirus. When I think of panic, I think of selfishness, a lack of focus, just people flailing about in society, hoping to get and procure their own and leave everyone else to the wolves. And right now I see us doing a pretty awful job of that. And I also see that there is a certain segment of my generation, which, my God, it just, I mean, if I needed another reason to hate my own generation, just seeing people spring breaking and going out to bars and not caring about the transmission of this disease that is known to be asymptomatic for young people to their loved ones at home is a very, very selfish thing to do in a completely different way than how panic is selfish, obviously. And of course, doing their part to fail to toe the line between panic and urgency is the mainstream media. Now, President Trump has been slammed in the media for his response or his alleged lack thereof for the coronavirus. But as of right now, it may not look like it economically. It may not look like it in terms of the amount of cases we're receiving every day, but things are surprisingly looking up in terms of federal action taken to combat the coronavirus in partnership with states and localities. And this is partially thanks to the president's early actions in slowing travel from China and now Europe. Now, the mainstream media would like to contend that the reason we're behind the ball is because Trump made cuts to the CDC's budget and other governmental infrastructure that is specifically tasked with confronting pandemic problems such as this. Now, while those cuts were proposed in the OMB's proposal of the budget, those were not adopted by Congress, something very, very important to point out because there is large bipartisan support for spending of that nature, given that it is certainly a national security concern that both Democrats and Republicans can rally around. And of course, not only national security concerns, but also the one thing Democrats and Republicans tend to agree on is spending money. But I digress that for now. Another reason the mainstream media says that the Trump administration has been lackluster is the cuts to his own presidential personnel, the White House personnel, that would be tasked with dealing with pandemics such as this. And this, I've tried to look up the sourcing of this allegation that Trump cut the team that would be in charge of handling pandemics on the National Security Council. And the only source that I can find where this originated was an ex-Obama staffer saying that her position was gotten rid of in the Trump administration. However, there are senior fellows over at the Hudson Institute of Politics right now that were on that very team during the Trump administration, and he now has a predecessor. That team is still very much active in the White House and in the National Security Council. Maybe her position specifically is no longer there. Furthermore, in times like these, it's also good to have task force. Furthermore, even if Trump made those personnel cuts, it wouldn't necessarily be a testament to a failure in response. Again, we have a multitude of federal agencies, also state agencies that are trained and equipped to deal with precisely these types of issues when they arise. And as I mentioned before, with that infrastructure in place, it makes it easier for the creation of a task force and then to easily inform that task force given the infrastructure that is supporting it. And folks, I mention all of this because the proof is in the pudding when it comes to infrastructure that can help us in terms of preparedness for pandemics like the coronavirus. The Global Health Security Index ranks the United States as number one overall in its preparedness to deal with an epidemic such as coronavirus. And it's not even close. The United States beats the United Kingdom by nearly 6 points between the 1 and 2 spot. It ranks number 1 in the prevention of the emergence or release of pathogens. It ranks number 1 in early detection and reporting for epidemics of potential international concern. It ranks number 1 in rapid response to and mitigation of the spread of an epidemic. It ranks number 1 in sufficient and robust health system to treat the sick and protect health workers. It ranks number 1 in the commitments to improving national capacity, financing, and adherence to norms. So no. So even though Trump didn't cut the positions that the mainstream media claims he did, no. I'm sorry. Cutting those positions in the White House did not and would not make a drastic impact in our capacity to respond to such issues, which has been Joe Biden's major talking point, which is obviously false. Also, President Trump has been slammed for not having the right amount of testing kits. And really, Trump has very little control of the CDC botching their own testing kits after wanting to create their own due to the fact WHO-provided testing kits had legitimate quality concerns. Now, this obviously now is causing the president and the administration to scramble in order to produce tests, and this is where we are right now. Private commercial labs such as Quest and Roche and Thermo Fisher have testing capabilities that greatly outnumber that of the CDC's. And as of now, 56,000 plus Americans have been tested, mostly coming from the test kits that were disseminated last week. Now, the CDC's capabilities and the capabilities that were utilized before bringing the private sector into the fold, according to Dr. Deborah Birx on the task force for coronavirus, could only run about 4 to 12 tests per platform per day. Now, the platforms they're just starting to incorporate from the private sector are now able to run thousands of tests per day. And of course, the lack of capability prior to the private sector coming in meant that there was a tremendous amount of backlog. So people who have been tested, who hadn't had their specimen run yet, will have it run in the next 24 to 48 hours. So what this means is that there will be a huge increase in the number of coronavirus cases in the next few days, but that's nearly making up for about a week of backlog cases. And that doesn't mean we're on trajectory with Italy, which is something the mainstream media might suggest in the coming days. When Italy's curve was shaping up this way, it hadn't placed much of the safety measures into effect that we have already, with large amounts of self-quarantining, and some states and cities, municipalities even going into full-on lockdown. The core here is that public-private partnership forged by President Trump helped right the wrongs in the beginning of this thing. Many of the wrongs that Trump had no control over. Here's what Dr. Deborah Birx had to say about that partnership yesterday.
The test kits that we put out last week through the approval, the rapid movement of that meeting that President Trump called less than 2 weeks ago, that has resulted in bringing our private sector to the table, because the test and the platform that was out there could only run between 4 and 12 tests per platform per day. We've now moved into platforms that can run basically tens of thousands of tests per day.
Furthermore, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper laid out exactly what the DoD is doing to fight against the coronavirus as well, including providing masks, ventilators, even hospital ships for some areas on the West and East Coast, with the fear that urban centers will have their health systems overrun by coronavirus cases, if not given multifaceted types of aid from the U.S. federal government.
I want to provide an update on DoD's coronavirus efforts as we continue to focus on our 3 priorities. The department is leaning forward in our response to COVID-19. We have issued international and domestic travel restrictions to all DoD personnel and families that should dramatically reduce potential exposure to the virus. Those have been in place for some time now. As I announced yesterday, the Department of Defense will make available up to 5 million N95 respirator masks and other personal protective equipment from our own strategic reserves to the Department of Health and Human Services for distribution. The first 1 million masks will be available immediately. We're also prepared to distribute to HHS up to 2,000 operational deployable ventilators for use as needed. Yesterday, I was at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is probably the military's premier research institute, where I got updated on the incredible work our people are doing as part of the interagency team to work on vaccines and therapeutics. They are making great progress there. We also have announced that we've certified our 16th lab, or will soon certify our 16th lab to help with processing tests from across the country. Additionally, I have directed, as the president mentioned, that the hospital ships Mercy and Comfort be prepared to deploy to increase the nation's medical capacity. And we have also alerted a variety of field and expeditionary hospitals to be prepared to deploy as well as needed, based on direction from the commander-in-chief.
Furthermore, Trump announced on Wednesday that vaccines are in stage 1 of testing. The first clinical trial of the vaccine candidate started earlier this week in Washington state. And Trump is right to point out that this is a remarkably fast turnaround in vaccine standards since they were able to figure out the genetic sequence in early January. It only took them 8 weeks to develop this. So pretty remarkable work by our health professionals that if you didn't believe before, you have to believe now. And you will, I believe, think this more and more in the coming weeks that they are vital to our nation's self-defense, maintenance, and well-being. Remarkable work by them. He's also saved lives by cutting the red tape over at the FDA. Of course, all conservatives and libertarians are asking why it wasn't easier for the president to suspend these regulations that held back the private sector's capacity to develop these tests and help more quickly, why President Trump didn't suspend these regulations more immediately, why the president had to wait for an emergency declaration to suspend those regulations, and why those regulations weren't in place at all, why we aren't considering making these regulatory cuts permanent. Furthermore, Ben Carson over at HUD is suspending evictions and foreclosures until the end of April, and I don't really know how to feel about this policy. I've never read any studies about eviction suspensions and foreclosures in the modern era and its effect on municipal economies, its effect on national or international economy as a whole. But I do fear that a bunch of these evictions and foreclosures are just going to rack up until the end of April, and the anvil is going to drop at the end of April for a lot of families and small businesses. So I really, really hope that doesn't happen. Also, FEMA is now at level 1, the highest level. Trump's worked extensively with FEMA, as he pointed out on Wednesday, given his work in disaster relief, such as the tornadoes in Nashville that struck earlier this year. I believe it was on Super Tuesday, the first Super Tuesday of the 3 Super Tuesdays in the Democratic and Republican primary process, as well as the extensive hurricanes of 2017. Trump is also tackling the geographic issues posed by this virus by allowing doctors to practice across state borders. Case, for example, New York is overwhelmed, or LA's health system is overwhelmed, or something of the sort. And this is really, really important to point out, right? That even though the United States as a nation is trying to flatten the curve, as they so say, right? The viral disease could spread so quickly that it could overwhelm the United States healthcare system's capability to give everyone treatment. And therefore, if we can slow the spread of the disease, even though many of us still might get the coronavirus, we will be able to have better treatment. The turnaround time will be much, much shorter, and there will be fewer overall deaths. But even if we do that as a nation, let's say New York and LA and San Francisco, large urban areas, maybe Dallas or Austin, just get overwhelmed by coronavirus. Even though they've attempted to flatten their curve, they haven't been able to actually do it. Well, then you have a geographical problem, right? Even though all of those cases in New York could be bodied by the entirety of the U.S. healthcare system, you're not going to be able to transport 100,000 patients from New York to, let's say, Denver, Colorado, to get them treatment over there. Suspending or creating this regulation that allows doctors to practice across state borders in times of crisis will do what it can to solve the geographic issues in flattening states and municipalities' own coronavirus curves. So now that we've largely dispelled a lot of the myths that the media is telling you about the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus, let's talk about their cheap hit. I mean, after calling it the Wuhan Chinese coronavirus for weeks and weeks and weeks, now that Trump said it, it's all of a sudden racist. And I mean, it is so astonishing to me that the media will continue to run cover for the communists in China as they deliberately spread, right? The communists in China deliberately spread a misinformation and propaganda campaign that the U.S. actually created coronavirus and a military member of the United States brought the virus to China, while simultaneously suspending and revoking, in some cases, the press passes for major U.S. outlets on, quote, fake news and ideological bias grounds in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. You know, it's funny. I thought Trump was the ultimate enemy of the press until you actually meet what an authoritarian looks like, until you actually experience it. Has Trump ever done anything like this? I mean, yeah, he did it to Jim Acosta because he didn't have his badge on one time. That was a viral video that I found very, very entertaining because the Secret Service, it wasn't Trump, it was the Secret Service member working the gate and said, "I don't know who you are." And he said, "You know who I am." Anyway, all that aside, it's pretty astonishing to watch the media cover basically the asses of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, it's so reminiscent of the same useful idiots phenomenon as Stalinists used to say in Russia, that the liberal media in the United States were a bunch of useful idiots helping to forward the Soviet Union's cause globally. And that's what we're seeing right now with the cries of racism and xenophobia for Trump saying that this is a Wuhan virus, this is a Chinese virus. Now, this is a Chinese virus. This virus did originate in Wuhan. All right, folks, that's just incontrovertible fact. But the reason that I feel comfortable, it's more accurately named the Chinese Communist Party virus, because that's really what this is. Yes, China has opened up a lot in the past 30 to 40 years, bringing with it 600 million people out of poverty, which is fantastic. I'm so happy that those individuals are no longer living impoverished lives, that they can actually fill their bellies with food and find work. But Deng Xiaoping made a decision when opening the Chinese economy to open up China economically for the Communist Party's own legitimacy worldwide, as well as contributions to its national strength, while holding on vigorously to the political aspect. Deng Xiaoping put it this way, basically. He said that we aren't going to let go with both hands. We're going to let go with one hand on the economy and hold both hands on the politics, and that's what you've seen come to bear. Chinese authoritarianism is preventing largely Milton Friedman's hypothesis in Capitalism and Freedom that economic rights inevitably lead to political rights. But we haven't seen that necessarily come to bear in China, that is still run by a one-party system of government that owns still many of China's largest companies, many of the means of production, and has a monopolization on the dissemination of information to its populace. And we've seen periodic backlashes as the economy has improved in China, right? We saw that in Tiananmen Square. We've seen that consistently, especially in the past year with the protests in Hong Kong, as encroachment on their way of life for the Chinese Communist Party's preferred way of existing come to the forefront internationally. And we're seeing it a little bit right now with the spread of the coronavirus. If the media would just stop covering for President Xi and the authoritarian Communist Party of China, we'd actually be able to hear professional medical voices talking about how China really, really botched this thing at the very beginning, which has led to the global pandemic it is now. So what I want to do now is explain why it is appropriate to call it the Chinese Communist Party virus. I'm going to go through a timeline of the early stages of the coronavirus outbreak in China and show you the government actions that specifically led to its immense spread throughout China, as well as Europe, and now, of course, the United States, and how the Chinese Communist Party and their quest for legitimacy and political power has, just like its entire existence, taken the lives of thousands, and could take thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more if we fail to contain this thing. Now, first, what you should know is that, of course, China's misinformation campaign is just the latest iteration of how China has been covering its own ass in this situation. China has consistently shifted the date of the first case backward. They thought it was early January, and then they told everyone it was December 31st, and then it was December 20th, and then it was December 17th. And now we know, according to our timeline, that the first sign of symptoms was actually on December. I mean, they covered this thing up for weeks. This person, because it takes a while for symptoms to show, most likely was infected in November. And by them covering it up for weeks, they allowed it to spread within Wuhan and then to other provinces in China, and of course, to other countries. And the bit I mentioned about fake news and ideological bias about the Chinese Communist Party being the impetus for revoking the WSJ, Washington Post, and New York Times press passes in China, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The CCP had been detaining journalists, in this case from Hong Kong, as early as January. These Hong Kong journalists reporting from Wuhan, they had to give the government their TV footage for confiscation and other electronics for inspection, as they were detained for several hours when reporting on the spread of coronavirus within Wuhan. On top of that, the doctors that were actually treating coronavirus seriously in China were criticized for spreading rumors and were sanctioned and censured and forced to write apology letters and self-criticism letters saying that their warnings undermined the Communist Party's capability to react, which obviously if you have half a brain, you know it's quite the opposite. And this just isn't the political authorities on the ground at the hospitals monitoring the government-controlled hospitals in China. I mean, this goes all the way up to President Xi. So let's just get right into the timeline here, where I'll go into all of these events that I briefly mentioned in more detail. On December 8th, according to the Wuhan government, symptoms became clear for the first confirmed case. China's healthcare system, despite huge improvements in the past 15 years, often leaves poor peasant or working class people with insufficient access to general doctors and with crippling hospital bills. And this is exactly what you saw from the street vendors that deal with a lot of different types of meat, had a lot of hand-to-hand contact with raw meat in this Hunan local market. Now, on December 10th, the number of patients tied to the Hunan market starts increasing, and by December 16th, there was a patient admitted to the Wuhan Central Hospital with an infection in both lungs, but was resistant to anti-flu drugs. Staff of that hospital later learned he worked at a wildlife market connected to the outbreak in the Hunan market. And on December 27th, Wuhan health officials are told that the new coronavirus is causing the illness. And 2 days later, on December 29th, there was growing indications of person-to-person contagion, with more people showing up throughout the region to hospitals with the same type of symptoms. Now, on December 30th, doctors started sharing concerns of contagion, which ended up spurring reprimands and censorship. A doctor at Wuhan Central, Li Wenlang, and a group posting on the WeChat messaging app again on December 30th, told more than 100 of his medical school classmates that 7 SARS cases are confirmed at Hunan Seafood Market, and said the patients were, quote, quarantined in the emergency department of our hospital. One person warned that the chat group could be censored. Dr. Lee responded with an update, coronavirus confirmed and type being determined, and he added, don't leak it, tell your family and relatives to take care. Now, by that night, the information was circulating widely on social media until government censors swung into action. Hospital officials, remember, these hospital officials, not like in the United States, these aren't doctors. They're communist politicos in charge of censoring and monitoring what goes on inside the hospital, and if it is to the approval of the Communist Party elites in Beijing, right? So keep that in mind. It's kind of like what you see in the HBO miniseries on Chernobyl with the Soviets. Yeah, they called Dr. Lee to reprimand him. And in a self-criticism letter confirmed by the Wall Street Journal, he wrote that his leak, quote, had a negative impact on the National Health Commission's effort to investigate the outbreak. Now, Dr. Lee would eventually die of the virus in February, and this would trigger an outpouring of grief and anger at the Chinese authorities, who failed to take coronavirus seriously in China. On December 31st, despite already knowing that this was a type of coronavirus, officials from the Communist Party announced that pneumonia outbreak was linked to the Hunan market and informed the WHO. And the day after that, on January 1st, the Hunan market was closed. Also on January 1st, a doctor alerts hospital of person-to-person transmission, but was reprimanded for spreading rumors. That doctor was Dr. Ai Fen. After she told the members of her staff about the situation and how they should take health precautions, the hospital's discipline department, a discipline department in the hospital. I mean, come on, wake up. This is communism in its worst political iteration. Yeah, that discipline department summoned her for a chat the next day. She was criticized for spreading rumors, according to Dr. I, and she tried to argue that the disease could be contagious. They said her action caused panic and damaged the stability of Wuhan, which we'll see later. It wasn't her who damaged the stability of Wuhan. It was the actions of President Xi and the Communist Party that did. Now, the hospital's leadership, right, Communist Party leadership, also banned staff from discussing the disease in public or via texts or images, Dr. I said. 8 days later, a nurse in her department started to feel sick. It was later confirmed that she was infected by the coronavirus. By early March, 3 doctors at her hospital had died from the infection. Now, on January 1st, Wuhan police publicly reprimanded 8 people for spreading similar types of rumors, and that was widely covered on Chinese national TV. On January 2nd, despite not yet declaring the existence of coronavirus or COVID-19 to the rest of the world, a government-run laboratory in China identifies coronavirus and maps its genome, but still doesn't publicly announce it. Then, on January 5th, Shanghai public health centers map the genome and privately urge control measures. The following day, China's CDC activates an emergency response, but it is still not publicly announced. And on January 7th, according to letters written by President Xi to Communist Party officials, he officially takes charge of the response, a detail that was not publicly disclosed until February. Then on January 9th, 2 days later, Chinese officials finally announced the coronavirus outbreak. Nearly 2 weeks after they knew it was a new type of coronavirus, and nearly a whole business week after they had mapped the entire genome. And despite announcing a coronavirus outbreak, they didn't share the genome with the rest of the world until January 12th. Fast forward to January 18th, tens of thousands of families participate in Wuhan's Lunar New Year banquet. President Xi went ahead with the New Year celebrations in Wuhan after he was on record saying he was leading the response to the epidemic. He was also leading the response when authorities let some 5 million people leave Wuhan without screening. Now, remember, at this point, the government still hadn't announced the capacity that the extent to which they found the virus was spreading between humans. 2 days later, President Xi makes his first public statement on the coronavirus, and the government task force chief announces the true extent to person-to-person transmission. 2 days after the United States reported its first case, on January 23rd, Wuhan and other areas are finally quarantined. Now, why does all of this matter? Why does the media's insipidness of attacking President Trump over calling it the Wuhan coronavirus matter? Well, it matters because the Chinese Communist Party virus has taken the lives of over 9,000 individuals thus far and 150 Americans. A study published in March by Southampton University showed that if Chinese authorities had not been obsessed with political power and political domination and control, and didn't need to be so concerned about their own legitimacy because they've quashed human rights routinely for the last 7 decades in their own country, if they had acted 3 weeks earlier instead of being concerned with all those things I just mentioned, the number of coronavirus cases could have been reduced by 95%, and its geographic spread limited severely. That saves lives. And that is why I will continue calling this the Chinese Communist Party virus. And I hope that severe measures come in the wake of this epidemic that reconsiders the United States' relationship with China, treating not only them as a global rival, but truly as an enemy. And so I'll be looking for Trump to make bold and decisive action further than what he's done in the past with tariffs on China. I'll be looking to Senator Josh Hawley, Senator Tom Cotton, Senator Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and others to reconsider our reliance on China for much of the medical goods that we have. I'll be looking to the private sector to reconsider their placement of supply chains, or at least making them more dynamic so that we don't have to rely on the Chinese government in situations like these moving forward. All right, this week for the Howl About That segment, where we shout out something that is fantastic going on over at Lone Conservative, usually an article or a column, and I break it down, give a little bit of my own analysis. But this week, because we're missing out on March Madness, I figured I'd bring on Tony Kinnett, the number one reporter in sports right now, because he is reporting on everything that's happening in Lone Conservative's right-wing madness bracket. And Tony, where are we as of right now in the Lone Conservative right-wing madness bracket? It's getting a lot of traffic on Twitter. People are seeming to really enjoy it and talking all of their support behind their chosen organizations, Twitter wildcards, verified pundits, and elected officials.
Well, I think that right now we're getting ready to go into the Sweet 6 quarantine. So that's our version of the Sweet 16 with all of the coronavirus stuff going around. Just seemed apropos. So that's kind of where we're going into. So we finished up the officials and organizations entrance into the Sweet 6 quarantine today. And we'll see based on today's voting how we get the commentators and the wild cards.
And Tony, let's talk about the seating a little bit. I didn't make the bracket. It's fine. It's fine. It's not like I work for Lone Conservative or anything. It's cool. It's not
No
like
comment.
it's not like it could have helped us with the podcast or anything. It's cool. Not bitter about it. But what I do want to say is there has been a lot of controversy around the seating. It is very Daily Wire biased. And I love the Daily Wire. I write for the Daily Wire from time to time. Ben Shapiro does deserve to be the number one seed in the commentators bracket, especially given Lone Conservatives' young demographic. But you go in, Mark Levin, a deserved 2, and then you have Michael Knowles at the 4, and where's Matt Walsh? Matt Walsh is 12, so Clavin's 9, right? But you got all 4 up there. We're missing some big names.
Yeah, we really are.
We put up Britt Hume, which is legitimate. I think that's good. But we are missing Dennis Prager. We are missing a few other big names in right-wing commentating.
Oh, for sure.
Charles T.W. Cook,
Dana
Rich
Lush,
Lowry. Right, Dana
Crowder,
Lush.
of course. So how the seating came about, really how this whole bracket came about, a friend of mine that works on social media for a Lone Conservative over in Pennsylvania, he and I were at CPAC together. And we were sitting in the room and just kind of talking after a long day. And we came up with this idea for some kind of a bracket for the big right-wing names of Twitter. So all of these people who had a presence here, who tweeted regularly, not just, links and references back to their old website, but actually had a presence on Twitter that was pretty substantial. And so we just started listing names, basically anything that came to our mind. And we were just trying to fill a 64 team bracket, right in the style of, March Madness. I'm a huge March Madness fan, huge college basketball fan. And so we basically just started listing out a ton of names, and we got rid of some of the ones that we didn't like. And when I say we got rid of some of the ones we didn't like, I mean like maybe names that were way too small, or maybe people that
mine.
Well, I can't speak for that. Basically, we just kind of threw a bunch of names together, and then we pitched it to the social media team. And within about a day and a half, it was up. So I threw everything together on Photoshop, slapped a few logos together, and then put it up. So we did get a lot of feedback. Hey, why didn't you get Crowder on there? I've gotten a lot of that, and quite honestly, the answer is we forgot. I forgot him, which is awkward as a Mug Club member. But I mean, it's sometimes these things happen. This is our first annual bracket. Next year, you can expect to see a lot more of the proper representation of who should be on this bracket, not just a very Daily Wire weighted bracket.
And it's just something that it's supposed to be fun. And that's why I wanted to talk about the seating a little bit, is to explain to people that, hey, this is just us having a good time. This is not Lone
we're just goofing around.
Or the folks over at Lone Conservative saying anything about the quality of content coming out of Steven Crowder or the Blaze TV. I don't think the Blaze is on here.
I mean, the Blaze should have been on there. Glenn Beck should have been on there. I wanted Hannity to be on there, but like just for kicks. Like there are a lot of people
you
on
can have
the right.
You can have a whole bracket to Fox News.
Done like huge, like it could have been way up in the 120s. And maybe next year we do something like that. We do like seasonal seating and things, but I just got the names kind of in order. Lou did kind of the basic seating, and we just threw it up basically just to get it out in as early as March as possible to go alongside March Madness. And well, now we're the only Madness bracket left.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you do have a variety of representation on the bracket, right? I mean, in the wild card bracket, you have folks like Comfortably Smug, and then you have folks like MJ, who, yes, is right of center, but doesn't necessarily identify as such. And some of them are, just pro shit posters. Others are really, really serious. Others are really, really serious commentators. You have Jonah Goldberg and David French and Alex DeSanctis in the same bracket that you have Kat Timpf and Mark Levin and Matt Walsh. I mean, very, very different across the ideological spectrum.
Oh, for sure.
And the same can be said as, for the officials, from Donald Trump to Rand Paul to Mitch McConnell, right? The establishment, the anti-establishment, and Rand Paul, the man who stands on any hill and cries.
Yeah, no kidding.
This is my hill to die on. Just kidding. The next hill's my hill to die on. That's just kind of how I love Rand Paul. Don't get me wrong.
Oh,
That's
yeah, for sure.
I view his
absolutely
politics sometimes.
Loved his idea of delaying the taxes for a little bit. Very good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff, absolutely. And of course, in the organizations bracket, I mean, you have on-campus organizations like TPUSA and YAL, and you have really just Twitter organizations like Reagan Battalion, and then you have National Review and Heritage Foundation. I mean, the roots of the modern conservative movement, and the Daily Wire obviously taking the #1 seed, which again, no surprise, given that that's Ben Shapiro's site and how much our generation adores Ben Shapiro
Oh,
and what
certainly.
how he's just a champion for the movement. So what I do want to get into now is the predictions and where we stand in the polling for the right-wing commentators bracket and the wild cards heading into the Sweet 6 quarantine.
Oh yeah. All right. So
What do we have?
so I'll give you a little ECN College Network interview here. So what we're seeing right now early on is that Ben Shapiro is absolutely giving the Hebrew hammer to Clavin. I mean, it's 82 to 17. It's not pretty. It's actually coming down pretty harsh. What I actually have expected and haven't seen so far, at least I'm seeing a lot of retweets here, although I haven't really checked some of the specifics. I expect, well, there you go. Knowles has retweeted it. Because Knowles retweeted it, um, he versus Walsh, we're actually seeing kind of a back and forth here, just barely in a 19% margin. I really do believe that it will come down to whoever gets the most involved in that fight. For Alex DeSanctis and Greg, I'm not really sure how that one's going to go. Greg will probably end up pulling it through unless Alex gets involved with it. If Cassie Dillon upsets Mark Levin, that is astonishing. Um, that would be pretty. That would be something. Um, Cassie has already been retweeting it pretty heavily. Smug is obviously just slaying. I mean, it's Smug. It's a Twitter bracket. I don't think much more needs to be said. JTLOL and MJ. MJ is definitely one of my favorite people in the bracket just because of how much fun she has with it. That's actually why I wanted her on the bracket, even though she's not technically quote unquote right wing, is because MJ is enjoying this. She's retweeting it, she's commenting on it, she's getting in there and having fun. JTLOL does not want to be in there. He literally came out in the first tweet and said, I forfeit. And he
That's
ended up
amazing.
winning. He won the first round anyway.
That's amazing. Sorry, Steven. Sorry,
Yeah,
Steven
yeah, I know,
Kent.
Steven.
You
He
just
was
had
he
no
was really
shot.
running for the snubbed anyway, poor guy. And then you've got AG and Matt, and we'll see how Matt does. I think if Matt retweets it from the sports shop, he can give it a little bit of a run for its money. And then Neon is comfortably taking Alfred the Great.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. I've got comfortably Smug to win this whole thing. I
Who do you
really do.
have
I
as your
think once
final four?
my final four. See, I think it's going to come down to Neon Taster and Comfortably Smug in the wild card bracket. Comfortably Smug is going to get more involved as this thing gets more intense because if he can win Right Wing Madness, it just adds to his arsenal of things he can shitpost with,
That is
and
true.
that's all Comfortably Smug wants in life. I think it's going to end up being a Ben Shapiro, Cassie Dillon quarterfinal in the right wing commentators, and Shapiro's going to
Wow.
win.
Bringing Dylan up. That's a very interesting. You don't usually see a 7 seed gaining that kind of traction in a bracket.
I think you see the 7 seed gaining that kind of traction when it is her, when it is provided by the network that she founded. I mean, it's just
I
our
truly
tweets are
do
just going to
love
be intrinsically biased towards Cassie.
I truly love the reply guys who are aggravated that Lone Conservative is in their own bracket. It's like, well, of course I'm going to put my own organization in the bracket that I made. Like it's a joke. Like,
Yeah, it's a prank, guys.
the
Relax.
number of reply guys and the simps are just coming out in full force, and I would say it's concerning as a teacher, but honestly, it's really funny to watch.
And then let's see. Organizations, I think Daily Wire comes out, and officials from the right wing. As much as I hate to say it, I think Nikki Haley beats Donald Trump. So it's Nikki Haley, Daily Wire, Smug, and Shapiro. I think that's
Interesting.
what it's going to come down to. And I think the final, we might end up with an all Daily Wire final. Nikki Haley
I
might get beat by the Daily Wire, and Shapiro might beat Comfortably Smug, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Shapiro makes it to the finals because Comfortably Smug will rally the minions. And because Comfortably Smug has just complained somewhat facetiously about Ben Shapiro for so long, like cry more lib, you know how he kind of trolls Ben
No, of
Shapiro.
course.
If he loses to Ben Shapiro in a right wing bracket, I mean, he's just
Oh
not going to let
no.
that happen.
Especially considering that this actually has enough traction and has been retweeted by the major accounts to be considered a legitimate standing bracket. Like this
Which
is
is
no longer just
hilarious.
a prank. Oh, I know. I'm still laughing at that. But this is no longer just a prank. It actually has some people, parading around. Watching YAF and ACC duke it out was one of the greatest Twitter fights I've seen in a good week, which is
The
saying
fact that
something.
ACC beat YAF is
Is
nuts.
nuts. But I'm telling you, it's all about the retweets at the right time in this bracket. And because of that, here's my final four. It's differing a little bit. I think that from the officials, I think Cruz pulls it off. Cruz's
I'd
Twitter
love that.
presence is second to none among these four individuals. Maybe Crenshaw if he decides to get involved, but if Crenshaw doesn't get active, Trump takes him. And then Ted, remember, Ted's the Zodiac killer. He's on a killing spree. He's just taking people down. And if you look at the brackets, Ted is taking people down like nobody's business. The margins that are being left behind in the wake of the axe murdering Ted Cruz is just perhaps unstoppable. In organizations, I think that the Daily Wire pulls it out because they have been active in retweeting it. I think that's going to be difficult for ACC to beat, unless the Daily Wire just, for some reason, decides to be subpar on social media that day, which is approximately 0 out of 7 days a week.
Right.
Yeah, no kidding. I think Shapiro pulls it out in the commentators. That's just an obvious. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case unless he suddenly pulls a hamstring in the fourth quarter. Finally, I think that Smug can pull it out, but I think your most enjoyable match is going to be MJ versus Smug next round to see
Oh,
who gets into the
absolutely.
Elite Eight. That's going to be beautiful. So I think that's where Smug's actually going to start getting involved is when MJ just starts poking him with the libertarian stick. And I
Uh-huh.
am very looking forward to that large scale confrontation.
I really do enjoy what you said about Cruz because I love Ted Cruz's Twitter. It's substantive, it's hilarious. It's everything that you want in a right-wing official's Twitter, right? It's knowledgeable. Um and not we don't always get that from our elected officials' Twitters. I heard that you have to beat Ted Cruz with 60%, right? That's what I heard because he'll
Oh
just
my goodness.
filibuster if you don't get 60. But I I think he could do really, really well. I don't think he'll beat Nikki Haley just because of the lone conservative demographic, right? Like we have to keep in mind that this is predominantly, even though we've seen great engagement from a lot of the major players in this bracket, I think we're not focusing on the fact that lone conservative has what 75,000 Twitter followers, and that's predominantly where this bracket's going to be appearing.
So we're actually just getting ready to round 50K followers. If you combine that with Cassie's over, I don't know how many she has, at least over 100,000, maybe several 100,000. If you combine those and you actually look at the engagement statistics, lone conservative votes in and of themselves are only constituting about a third of the total votes. That is wildly under the margin needed to flip this in a different direction. And while I
Interesting. I had
definitely
no
agree,
idea that
the
that was the
stats on
case.
this have been amazing from a social media perspective. This has found its way. I mean, it's seeped its way in enough for the alt-right to come out and, hide out in the replies. And then, of course, you have the libertarians in the replies and then the simps in the replies. And you have all
Right.
those people coming out and they don't even follow people that are followed by people retweeting the lone conservative bracket. It's
Right. Why don't we
definitely
have
getting
Nick
around.
Fuentes? Oh, shove it.
I've seen that enough times, but
Shove
the
it.
funny part is, I mean, I'm perfectly fine. Hey, you want to be in you want to comment, that you want Fuentes in it? All right, that's fine.
Yeah,
I'm
comment
not
that
gonna
you want Fuentes in it.
I'm not gonna
He
put
has to
him
be
in
on the
there,
right.
but you can put him.
He has
You
to be
go
a
right ahead,
legitimate
man.
conservative first, but then, then maybe we'll consider it.
I'm, as far as that, look, they have every right they want to, suggest who they want for the bracket, and it doesn't bother me any. I didn't lose any sleep over it.
Yeah, they have every right to bitch and moan. Doesn't mean that they should. Dude,
Speaking
goodness,
of speaking
I'm
of
all.
moaning, the ACC YAF matchup. My goodness, the fallout from that. I can't believe. I'm sorry. I still can't believe YAF lost.
I. How did Spencer let that happen?
I
How did
don't.
Spencer Brown over at YAF let that happen?
I don't know. You
It's
see, I thought that
baffling to
when
me.
Kevin came out and Kevin like retweeted it with something really catchy right in about the third quarter. I thought it was going to turn around. And then ACC just kept hammering over and over and over. They just melted that glacier as far as it would go.
Hey, they gave everyone a lot of free drinks at happy hour at CPAC.
Did
They
they
might have been
ever?
DMing people saying, "Do you remember when we gave you free drinks? You
I
could have
remember
all this and
looking
more
around.
next time you go to."
I remember those delicious steak skewers and watching other people that were engorged on the free drinks, just like falling into people. What an excellent CPAC.
It was
I
it
mean, the
was
fun was
hilarious to watch.
infectious.
A fun, yes, a really infectious CPAC, it turns out. All right, so projected winner, just one more time from me, comfortably smug. From you, who do you think the projected winner is? You gave us your final four. What's the final? Who wins it?
I think that if Benny Schapp is able to rally enough against Smug, which is a slim chance, but it's a chance, if that is able to occur, then I think that it is a toss up between Shapiro or Haley. I think it's a toss up.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds for sure. We are going to be keeping an eye on it here. We are probably going to have the full results next time we have an episode. But Tony, thank you so much for coming on. Where can everyone find you on social media?
As always, you can find me at the Tonus. That's TheTonus on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. If you're over the age of 65. Other than that, you can find me on The Lone Conservative. I'll be giving a good amount of audio coverage of this right-wing madness bracket on the Electoral College Network.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say to close this segment out. You have to follow Lone Conservative on Twitter at LO Conservative and make sure that you keep updated on everything that's happening with the bracket by listening to Tony's fantastically scripted audio bits that, yours truly sometimes appears in. So keep an eye out for those to get all of the updates from each one of the rounds. And we cannot wait to see where this goes. Again, Tony, thank you for putting this together, and thank you for giving us, something to cheer for while all the sports are suspended due to coronavirus.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, Brad.
All right, and if you are sitting at home looking for things to do with just your quarantined self, then go to loneconservative.com, check out our merchandise store, make some purchases, help out Lone Conservative through a difficult time, and make sure that we can keep bringing you the content that you need to survive this quarantine, including this very podcast. Also, go listen to the Cassie Dillon Show, where she tells some amazing stories of some different activists throughout the conservative movement internationally. So go check that show out. And if you're not into merch, but you really want to contribute and you're not a college student, make sure you hit that donate now button at loneconservative.com. It'll take you to a PayPal window where you can drop a donation to us. Thank you so much for supporting Lone Conservative through this tough time. We are certainly hoping to support you through this tough time by bringing you everything you could possibly need to make it through the next few weeks.